John's vision, seeing beyond the flesh into the realm of the spirit. There are moments in human history when the veil between what is seen and what is unseen grows thin. In those moments, the ordinary laws of perception no longer apply, and a deeper reality presses itself upon the soul. John's vision stands as one of the most profound examples of this unveiling. It is not merely a religious experience, nor simply a mystical account written in symbolic language. It is a radical confrontation with the limits of the flesh and an invitation to awaken the spirit within the human being. John did not escape the world by abandoning his body. He transcended it by learning how to see beyond it. To understand John's vision is to understand a fundamental truth. The flesh perceives surfaces, but the spirit perceives meaning. The eyes of the body are bound to time, space, fear, and decay. The eyes of the spirit operate in eternity, truth, and divine order. When John speaks of visions, thrones, lights, voices, and realms beyond comprehension, he is not describing fantasies or hallucinations. He is articulating what happens when the dominance of the flesh is suspended and the spiritual senses awaken. Modern humanity struggles with this idea. We live in an age obsessed with the visible, the measurable, and the tangible. What cannot be proven by instruments is often dismissed. Yet John's experience challenges this limitation directly. His vision declares that reality does not end where the senses stop. In fact, what the senses perceive is only the outermost layer of existence. Beneath it lies a spiritual architecture that governs events, destinies, and transformations long before they appear in the material world. John's isolation on Patmos was not an accident. Separation from distraction has always been a prerequisite for spiritual sight. The flesh demands noise, stimulation, comfort, and certainty. The spirit requires silence, surrender, endurance, and trust. When John was stripped of comfort and social identity, he was not diminished. He was refined. In that state, his inner vision grew sharper than any physical sight. This is why John's vision remains relevant today. It is not confined to ancient times or sacred texts. It speaks directly to anyone who feels the tension between what they see in the world and what they sense within their soul. It addresses the confusion of living in a broken world while intuitively knowing that something eternal exists beyond it. John's experience teaches that spiritual sight is not given to the strongest body or the most powerful position, but to the one who learns to look beyond appearances. To see beyond the flesh is not to reject the world, but to understand it correctly. The flesh interprets reality through fear and desire. The spirit interprets reality through truth and alignment. John's vision reveals that when the spirit reigns, fear loses authority, suffering gains meaning, and chaos reveals hidden order. This is not escapism, it is awakening. What follows is not merely an explanation of John's vision, but a journey into the deeper mechanics of spiritual perception. It is an exploration of how the flesh blinds, how the spirit sees, and how transformation occurs when the inner eyes are opened. John's vision is not meant to be admired from a distance. It is meant to be understood, internalized, and lived. The blindness of the flesh and the awakening of spiritual sight. The flesh was never designed to lead. It was designed to serve. Yet from the earliest moments of human consciousness, the flesh has attempted to dominate perception. It defines reality by what can be touched, seen, possessed, or controlled. This dominance creates a form of blindness so normalized that it often goes unnoticed. People believe they are seeing clearly, when in truth they are only interpreting shadows on the surface of things. John's vision begins with a disruption of this blindness. Before he sees thrones, angels, or cosmic realities, he hears a voice that commands attention. This detail is critical. Spiritual awakening does not begin with sight. It begins with hearing. The flesh trusts what it sees. The spirit responds to what it hears. Faith, understanding, and revelation all originate in this inner reception. The voice John hears does not appeal to logic or comfort. It calls him to rise above his current mode of perception. The blindness of the flesh is rooted in fear. The body is vulnerable. It ages, weakens, and dies. Because of this, it clings to control. It resists uncertainty and rejects anything that threatens its sense of safety. Spiritual truth often does exactly that. It dismantles false security and exposes deeper realities that cannot be controlled. This is why the flesh resists spiritual awakening. It senses the loss of dominance. John's exile forced him into confrontation with this fear. Stripped of power, status, and certainty, he had nothing left to defend. The flesh, deprived of its usual reinforcements, grew quiet. In that silence, the spirit emerged. This pattern is consistent across all genuine spiritual awakenings. Comfort dulls perception, difficulty sharpens it. When John begins to see beyond the flesh, the language he uses becomes symbolic, not because the vision is unclear, but because the human mind lacks direct vocabulary for spiritual realities. Symbols are bridges between worlds. They translate the infinite into forms the finite mind can grasp. The flesh often dismisses symbolism as imagination. The spirit recognizes it as revelation. Spiritual sight does not replace physical sight, it reorders it. John still existed in the physical world. He still felt hunger, fatigue, and isolation, but these no longer defined his reality. He understood that the visible world operates within a greater invisible structure. This realization changes everything. Fear loses its grip when one understands that events are not random, suffering is not meaningless, and power is not limited to what is seen. The awakening of spiritual sight also reveals hierarchy, not hierarchy of social status, but of authority and alignment. John sees that true authority flows from the spiritual realm into the material one, not the other way around. This is deeply unsettling to the flesh, which equates power with force. The spirit understands power as alignment with divine order. This awakening comes at a cost. Once the spirit sees, it cannot unsee. The illusions that once brought comfort no longer satisfy. The individual becomes aware of deeper responsibilities, deeper truths, and deeper consequences. This is why many resist spiritual sight. It demands transformation, not mere belief. John's vision teaches that spiritual sight is not reserved for prophets or saints. It is available to anyone willing to confront the limitations of the flesh honestly. It begins when one stops demanding that reality conform to comfort and starts asking what is true beyond appearances. This shift marks the transition from survival-based perception to truth-based awareness. The flesh sees time as linear and oppressive. The spirit sees time as purposeful and guided. The flesh sees suffering as meaningless pain. The spirit sees it as refinement. The flesh sees isolation as abandonment. The spirit recognizes it as preparation. John's exile, viewed through the flesh, was punishment. Viewed through the spirit, it was initiation. To awaken spiritual sight is to accept that the world is not what it appears to be on the surface. It is structured, intentional, and responsive to inner alignment. Those who see beyond the flesh no longer live as victims of circumstance. They become participants in a larger unfolding reality. If this message resonates with you, it is because spiritual sight is not something foreign. It is something remembered. If you want to continue exploring these truths and deepen your understanding of the unseen realities shaping your life, subscribe to the channel now and walk with us through the next stages of this journey into the realm of the spirit. The opening of the inner realm and the language of the Spirit. When spiritual sight awakens, perception does not merely expand outward, it turns inward first. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of John's vision. Many readers focus on what John saw beyond the world, but fewer recognize that the gateway to those revelations opened within him. The realm of the Spirit is not entered by physical movement, but by inner alignment. John did not travel through space. His consciousness was elevated beyond the limits imposed by the flesh. The flesh understands reality through separation. It divides subject and object, observer and observed. The Spirit, however, perceives unity. This shift in perception is essential to understanding the inner realm John accessed. When the Spirit begins to lead, the sense of isolation dissolves. One no longer feels like a fragment lost in a hostile universe, but like a conscious participant within a vast, ordered whole. John's vision reflects this transition clearly. He does not merely observe the spiritual realm, he is positioned within it. The opening of the inner realm requires surrender. The flesh resists surrender because it equates control with survival. Yet spiritual perception cannot coexist with domination by the ego. John's circumstances forced him into surrender long before the vision occurred. Exile stripped him of identity markers, influence, and social reinforcement. In this stripped state, the internal noise that usually drowns out spiritual perception was silenced. What remained was awareness. Awareness is the true threshold of the inner realm. It is not imagination, nor is it emotional excitement. It is a deep, steady clarity that arises when the mind ceases to cling to outcomes. John's description of being in the Spirit signifies this state. It does not mean emotional ecstasy or trance in the shallow sense. It means alignment. His consciousness was no longer governed by fear, resentment, or anticipation. It was present, receptive, and open. Within this state, the language of the Spirit emerges. This language does not function like human speech. It communicates through symbols, impressions, patterns, and resonance. This is why John's vision is rich with imagery that defies literal interpretation. The flesh demands precise definitions and rigid explanations. The Spirit communicates through meaning rather than mechanics. A symbol in spiritual language is not a metaphor. It is a compressed form of truth that unfolds differently depending on the readiness of the one perceiving it. Many misunderstand spiritual language because they attempt to decode it with the intellect alone. The intellect belongs to the fleshly mode of perception. It analyzes, categorizes, and compares. Spiritual language must be received, not dissected. John did not analyze his vision as it occurred, he witnessed it. Understanding followed reception, not the other way around. This order is crucial. When reversed, confusion arises. The inner realm is not chaotic, even though it appears overwhelming to the unprepared mind. John's vision reveals an astonishing level of order, hierarchy, and intentionality. The Spirit does not operate randomly. It operates according to principles that are invisible to the flesh, but absolute in their effect. When John sees structures of authority, cycles of action, and responses unfolding in precise sequence, he is witnessing the architecture that underlies the visible world. This realization transforms how one interprets life. Events are no longer seen as isolated accidents. They are recognized as manifestations of deeper processes already set in motion. The inner realm is where causes exist before effects appear in the physical world. John's vision shows that history unfolds from the unseen to the seen, not the reverse. This understanding dissolves despair. If outcomes are shaped in the spiritual realm, then alignment, not force, becomes the primary means of change. The flesh often interprets delay as abandonment. The Spirit understands delay as preparation. Within the inner realm, time does not function as a linear prison, but as a medium for maturation. John perceives this timelessness clearly. His vision collapses past, present, and future into a unified awareness. This does not negate sequence, but it reframes it. What is yet to occur already exists in potential, awaiting the proper alignment to manifest. As the inner realm opens, self-perception changes as well. The individual no longer defines identity by roles, achievements, or failures. Identity becomes rooted in position within the greater order. John is not portrayed as powerful because of personal strength, but because of proximity to truth. Authority in the spiritual realm flows from alignment, not assertion. This stands in stark contrast to the flesh, which equates authority with dominance. The opening of the inner realm also exposes internal resistance. As awareness deepens, unresolved fears, attachments, and illusions surface. This is not punishment. It is purification. The spirit reveals what the flesh hides. John's vision includes moments of awe, but also moments of trembling. True spiritual sight destabilizes false foundations. It challenges the narratives the ego constructs to protect itself. This is why many turn away after brief encounters with spiritual awareness. They seek comfort, not truth. John did not retreat. He remained receptive even when overwhelmed. This endurance allowed the vision to deepen rather than collapse. Spiritual perception matures through sustained openness, not fleeting curiosity. The language of the spirit also redefines power. In the inner realm, power is not reactive. It does not respond impulsively to threats. It flows steadily from source to expression. John witnesses forces that act without haste, yet accomplish irreversible change. This reveals a principle often missed by the flesh. Urgency is not strength, alignment is. As the inner realm opens, the fear of loss diminishes. The flesh clings because it believes scarcity governs existence. The spirit reveals abundance as the foundational reality. This does not mean endless material gain, but inexhaustible meaning, purpose, and connection. John's vision is saturated with fullness, light, sound, movement, presence. Nothing appears empty or accidental. The opening of the inner realm also clarifies suffering. Pain is no longer interpreted as evidence of failure or divine absence. It becomes a signal of transformation in progress. John's own suffering did not disqualify him from revelation. It prepared him for it. This overturns one of the flesh's most persistent lies, that comfort equals favor and difficulty equals rejection. Spiritual language reframes obedience as alignment rather than submission. The flesh hears obedience and imagines loss of freedom. The spirit understands obedience as harmony with truth. John does not appear constrained in his vision. He is liberated. The structures he perceives do not imprison him, they orient him. Freedom in the spiritual realm is not the absence of structure, but the presence of right order. As the inner realm continues to open, discernment sharpens. Not all spiritual impressions are equal. John does not interpret everything as divine simply because it is unseen. True spiritual sight includes discernment, the ability to distinguish truth from distortion, source from imitation. This discernment is cultivated through humility, patience, and consistency. The flesh seeks immediate validation. The spirit values long-term coherence. John's vision unfolds progressively, not all at once. Each layer prepares him for the next. This gradual unveiling protects the mind from fragmentation. Sudden exposure without preparation overwhelms rather than enlightens. The spirit is precise in its timing. The opening of the inner realm ultimately reorients purpose. Life is no longer about survival, accumulation, or recognition. It becomes about participation in a larger unfolding reality. John's role shifts from observer to messenger. Seeing brings responsibility. Spiritual sight is not granted for personal elevation, but for service. This responsibility weighs heavily, but it also anchors meaning. Those who see beyond the flesh cannot return to shallow existence. They are compelled to live differently, speak differently, and choose differently. This is not moral superiority, it is perceptual transformation. One cannot unknow what has been revealed. The inner realm remains accessible, but it does not remain passive. It responds to alignment. As awareness deepens, participation increases. John's vision does not end with observation. It leads to engagement. He is instructed, directed, and sent. Spiritual sight always moves toward expression. If you feel stirred by these truths, it is because the opening of the inner realm is not limited to one man in history. It is an invitation extended to all who are willing to look beyond appearances and listen beyond noise. If you want to continue this journey and explore the deeper layers of spiritual perception revealed in John's vision, subscribe to the channel now and walk with us into the unfolding depths of the realm of the Spirit. The transition from seeing into understanding marks a critical turning point in John's vision. Spiritual sight, once awakened, does not remain static. It demands interpretation, endurance, and transformation. Topic 3 moves deeper into this progression, revealing how spiritual perception reshapes identity, dissolves fear, and reorders reality itself. John's vision is not merely about witnessing hidden realms. It is about becoming capable of existing in truth without being shattered by it. As the Spirit assumes leadership over perception, identity begins to detach from the flesh. The flesh defines identity through roles, labels, achievements, wounds, and social mirrors. The Spirit defines identity through essence and alignment. John does not encounter the spiritual realm as a stranger trying to earn belonging. He encounters it as one who already belongs, but had not yet fully remembered who he was. This remembrance is one of the most destabilizing and liberating aspects of spiritual awakening. The fear that dominates human life originates from misidentification. When a person believes they are only the body, fear becomes rational. Loss, pain, rejection, and death all appear final. But when spiritual perception clarifies identity as something deeper than flesh, fear loses its authority. It does not vanish instantly, but it no longer governs decisions. John's vision unfolds in an atmosphere of awe rather than panic. Even when confronted with overwhelming power, his response is reverence, not terror. This distinction matters. Terror paralyzes, reverence stabilizes. As identity shifts, so does the interpretation of power. The flesh equates power with force, domination, and control. The Spirit recognizes power as coherence with divine order. In John's vision, nothing appears frantic. Movements are deliberate. Voices speak with clarity rather than urgency. Authority is expressed through presence, not aggression. This reveals a fundamental spiritual law. What is aligned does not need to prove itself. Understanding this law reshapes how one engages with the world. The flesh reacts, the Spirit responds. Reaction is fueled by fear and scarcity. Response flows from awareness and trust. John's vision demonstrates that the unseen realm operates through response, not reaction. Events unfold with precision, not impulsiveness. This realization invites a new way of living, one grounded in attentiveness rather than anxiety. Spiritual perception also alters the relationship with suffering. When identity is bound to the flesh, suffering appears as meaningless interruption. When identity is anchored in the Spirit, suffering becomes a passage. This does not romanticize pain, but it contextualizes it. John's exile, loneliness, and hardship were not erased by his vision, but they were reinterpreted. They became part of a larger movement, rather than evidence of abandonment. This reinterpretation does not numb emotion. On the contrary, spiritual perception deepens emotional sensitivity while preventing emotional captivity. John feels awe, humility, and gravity, but he is not overwhelmed by despair. Emotional regulation emerges naturally when perception is aligned. The flesh swings between extremes. The spirit holds steady. As understanding deepens, the illusion of randomness dissolves. John's vision reveals pattern layered upon pattern. Actions generate consequences not arbitrarily, but according to principles. The flesh resists this idea because it challenges the belief that chaos reigns. Yet the spirit recognizes that even chaos has boundaries. Disorder exists, but it is not sovereign. This recognition reshapes responsibility. When life is seen as random, responsibility feels oppressive. When life is seen as ordered, responsibility becomes meaningful. John does not receive knowledge for entertainment or escape. He receives it because knowledge creates accountability. To see clearly is to be entrusted with stewardship. Stewardship is a concept the flesh often misunderstands. It assumes ownership. The spirit understands stewardship as participation without possession. John does not claim the vision as his own. He transmits it. This posture protects the soul from arrogance. Spiritual insight without humility corrodes. John's posture remains receptive, not self-exalting. As spiritual perception matures, discernment intensifies. Not everything unseen is truth. The spiritual realm contains both alignment and distortion. John's vision includes clear distinctions between what flows from divine order and what resists it. This distinction is essential. Without it, spiritual curiosity becomes vulnerability. Discernment does not arise from suspicion, but from familiarity with truth. Truth, in the spiritual sense, is not information alone. It is resonance. Something rings true not because it is persuasive, but because it aligns internally. John recognizes authority not by appearance, but by coherence. This ability develops through sustained exposure to spiritual clarity. It cannot be rushed or imitated. As fear dissolves, attachment loosens. The flesh clings because it believes loss is annihilation. The spirit understands that release often precedes expansion. John's vision shows cycles of release and renewal woven into the fabric of reality. Endings are not failures, they are transitions. This insight frees the soul from resisting necessary change. Time itself is reinterpreted through spiritual perception. The flesh experiences time as pressure. The spirit experiences time as sequence. Pressure produces anxiety. Sequence produces patience. John perceives events unfolding with inevitability, not haste. This does not encourage passivity. It encourages trust in timing rather than obsession with immediacy. Trust becomes possible when understanding replaces assumption. The flesh assumes worst-case scenarios because it lacks access to the unseen structure guiding events. The spirit, having glimpsed that structure, rests without complacency. John's vision balances urgency with assurance. Action is required, but panic is unnecessary. As understanding deepens, the temptation to retreat arises. Seeing beyond the flesh isolates the individual from mainstream perception. Many prefer blindness because it allows conformity. John does not retreat into silence. He speaks. Spiritual perception demands articulation. Truth withheld stagnates. Truth expressed circulates. Expression, however, carries cost. Those anchored in flesh-based perception often resist what challenges their framework. John's vision was not universally welcomed. Spiritual sight often provokes hostility because it exposes illusion. This is not a call to confrontation, but to courage. Courage in this context is not bravado. It is consistency. It is the willingness to remain aligned even when misunderstood. John does not attempt to soften or sensationalize his vision to gain acceptance. He remains faithful to what he perceived. This integrity preserves clarity. As perception stabilizes, the fear of death diminishes. Death loses its finality when identity transcends flesh. This does not erase grief, but it reframes it. John's vision presents continuity rather than cessation. Life is revealed as transformation, not termination. This understanding reshapes how one lives daily life. Choices become intentional. Distractions lose appeal. Superficial conflicts lose urgency. The individual becomes inwardly anchored while outwardly engaged. This balance prevents both escapism and entanglement. Ultimately, Topic 3 reveals that spiritual perception is not about acquiring secret knowledge. It is about becoming capable of bearing truth. Truth is weighty. It requires stability. John's journey shows that stability arises not from certainty, but from surrender to alignment. If you sense that this perspective is challenging yet grounding, it is because spiritual understanding speaks to something already present within you. If you want to continue this exploration and move deeper into the realities revealed through John's vision, subscribe to the channel now and continue walking with us beyond the limits of the flesh and into the clarity of the spirit. As John's vision progresses, something subtle yet decisive occurs. Spiritual perception no longer functions only as revelation. It becomes transformation in motion. What was first seen, then understood, now begins to reshape the inner structure of the one who sees. Topic 4 enters this phase. Here, the vision no longer feels distant or observational. It presses inward, rearranging priorities, dissolving false attachments, and redefining what it means to live while still walking in the flesh. One of the greatest illusions maintained by flesh-based perception is the belief that spiritual awareness exists apart from daily life. Many imagine the spiritual realm as something elevated, distant, or reserved for extraordinary moments. John's vision dismantles this separation. The realm of the spirit is not an escape from reality. It is the source from which reality flows. To see beyond the flesh is not to abandon the world, but to inhabit it differently. As this realization takes hold, inner conflict intensifies before it resolves. The flesh does not surrender quietly. It negotiates, resists, and reasserts itself through habit, fear, and desire. John's vision does not depict this struggle explicitly, yet it is implicit in every stage of revelation. The deeper the alignment with the spirit, the more clearly the misalignments of the flesh are exposed. This exposure is uncomfortable. Old motivations that once felt natural begin to feel hollow. Ambitions driven by recognition lose their appeal. Attachments rooted in fear reveal their fragility. This is not punishment, it is clarification. The spirit does not shame the flesh, but it does not allow illusion to persist. Truth illuminates without cruelty, yet it does not soften itself to preserve comfort. As perception stabilizes, the inner world becomes ordered. The chaos that once felt unavoidable is recognized as unmanaged attention. When awareness is scattered, life feels overwhelming. When awareness is centered, life becomes navigable. John's vision reflects this centering. Amid images of immense scale and intensity, there is no confusion. Everything occupies its place. Nothing intrudes without purpose. This inner ordering produces a profound shift in how suffering is carried. Pain does not disappear, but it no longer defines identity. The flesh interprets pain as personal injustice. The spirit interprets it as movement within a larger process. John's experience reveals that pain endured with alignment does not harden the soul. It refines it. Resistance prolongs suffering. Acceptance transforms it. Acceptance, however, must not be confused with passivity. Spiritual alignment does not render a person inactive. It clarifies action. John does not withdraw from responsibility after his vision. He engages more deliberately. Action no longer arises from fear of loss, but from coherence with truth. This distinction changes the quality of every decision. As the inner transformation deepens, time itself is experienced differently. The urgency that once drove impulsive choices gives way to patience. Patience here is not delay, it is confidence in sequence. John's vision reveals events unfolding neither too early nor too late. Everything arrives when the conditions are ready. This understanding frees the individual from the anxiety of forcing outcomes. With patience comes restraint. The flesh seeks immediate expression. The spirit values timing. Not every truth must be spoken at once. Not every insight must be displayed. John writes what he is instructed to write and withholds what is not yet meant to be revealed. This discipline protects both the messenger and the message. As alignment strengthens, fear loses its dominance over imagination. The flesh imagines worst-case futures because it lacks visibility beyond the present moment. The spirit, having glimpsed the architecture beneath events, no longer collapses under uncertainty. This does not guarantee favorable outcomes, but it establishes stability regardless of outcome. Stability does not equal rigidity. In fact, spiritual alignment increases adaptability. When identity is no longer threatened by change, flexibility becomes natural. John's vision depicts cycles of change that are not destructive, but necessary. Endings make space for renewal. Resistance to change arises only when identity is bound to form rather than essence. This realization reshapes relationships. The flesh approaches relationships through need and validation. The spirit approaches them through recognition and alignment. Some connections deepen, others fall away. This is not rejection, it is recalibration. John's isolation was not a failure of relationship, but a refinement of it. As the vision integrates, silence becomes meaningful rather than empty. The flesh fears silence because it confronts unresolved noise within. The spirit welcomes silence because it reveals coherence. John's receptivity depends on silence, not absence of sound, but absence of inner resistance. From this silence emerges clarity of purpose. Purpose is no longer sought externally, it is recognized internally. John does not ask what his role should be, it is revealed as a natural extension of alignment. This is one of the most liberating shifts spiritual perception offers. Purpose ceases to be a burden and becomes a function. Function, in the spiritual sense, is not limitation, it is expression. A bird does not feel confined by its wings, it fulfills them. Likewise, alignment with purpose does not restrict freedom, it directs it. John's obedience is not submission to authority, it is cooperation with truth. As inner transformation completes this phase, humility deepens. Spiritual sight does not inflate the ego, it dissolves it. The more John sees, the less he centers himself. This humility is not self-denial, but self-clarity. The individual becomes transparent to truth rather than obstructive. Transparency changes how truth is communicated. John does not embellish his vision to impress. He records it faithfully, even when it challenges comprehension. Authentic spiritual communication does not aim to persuade, it aims to transmit. Those who are ready will receive it. Those who are not will resist it. Resistance from others no longer destabilizes the aligned individual. Approval and rejection lose their power when identity is anchored beyond the flesh. This does not harden the heart, it strengthens it. Compassion becomes possible without compromise. By this stage of the vision, the separation between spiritual awareness and daily existence dissolves. The spirit is no longer an occasional visitor, it becomes the governing principle. The flesh remains present, but it no longer leads. Life becomes quieter, not because challenges cease, but because fear no longer amplifies them. This is the quiet strength John's vision reveals, not dominance, not escape, not invulnerability, but grounded clarity. To see beyond the flesh is not to become untouchable, it is to become unshakable. If these insights resonate with you, it is because this transformation is not unique to John. It is a pattern available to all who are willing to release illusion and align with truth. If you want to continue this journey and move toward the final unfolding of John's vision, subscribe to the channel now and walk with us into the next depth of spiritual understanding. As John's vision reaches its final depth, something decisive crystallizes. What began as sight, moved into understanding, and matured through transformation, now becomes embodiment. Topic 5 is not about what John sees anymore, but about what he becomes capable of carrying without fracture. The vision completes its work not when revelation ends, but when the human vessel becomes stable enough to live in the world without being governed by it. This is the culmination of seeing beyond the flesh into the realm of the spirit. At this stage, spiritual awareness no longer feels extraordinary. It feels natural. This is one of the great paradoxes of awakening. In the beginning, revelation feels overwhelming, even shocking. By the end, it feels inevitable. Truth does not remain foreign. It becomes familiar, not because it diminishes, but because the inner structure has expanded to accommodate it. John is no longer startled by what he perceives. He is grounded within it. Embodiment means that spiritual truth no longer lives only in vision or language, but in posture, decision and presence. The flesh once dictated reactions automatically. Now responses arise from alignment. This shift is subtle but absolute. It is the difference between a life driven by impulse and a life guided by coherence. John's final posture is not one of retreat, but of readiness. Readiness does not imply constant action. It implies availability. The flesh seeks to fill time with activity to avoid stillness. The spirit remains still so that action, when it comes, is precise. John's vision does not leave him restless. It leaves him anchored. This anchoring is what allows spiritual perception to coexist with ordinary life. One of the clearest signs of embodiment is the disappearance of spiritual urgency. Urgency belongs to fear. It assumes that meaning will be lost if not grasped immediately. The spirit understands that what is true cannot be missed. John's vision unfolds with gravity, not haste. Even the most decisive events are presented without panic. This calm is not detachment, it is mastery. Mastery here does not mean control over others or circumstances. It means self-governance. The flesh once ruled through reflex. The spirit now governs through awareness. This internal sovereignty is the true authority revealed in John's vision. No external force can grant or remove it. It arises from alignment alone. As embodiment stabilizes, the need for validation dissolves. The flesh seeks confirmation because it doubts its own worth. The spirit recognizes worth as inherent. John does not seek to convince others of the legitimacy of his vision. He testifies. Whether it is accepted or rejected does not alter its truth. This freedom from validation is one of the most liberating fruits of spiritual embodiment. With this freedom comes a deeper compassion. Compassion that does not attempt to rescue or control, but understands. John's vision reveals conflict, resistance, and distortion in the world, yet it does not foster hatred. Clarity does not require condemnation. Seeing beyond the flesh allows one to recognize ignorance without becoming hostile toward it. This compassion is grounded in realism, not idealism. Embodiment does not deny darkness. It contextualizes it. The flesh fears darkness because it feels threatened by it. The spirit understands darkness as absence of alignment, not an equal force. John's vision reveals that distortion exists, but it does not reign. This understanding dissolves despair. Despair arises when one believes disorder is ultimate. Embodiment reveals order as foundational. Even when circumstances appear chaotic, the underlying structure remains intact. John does not leave his vision believing that everything will be easy. He leaves knowing that everything is meaningful. Meaning reshapes endurance. The flesh endures by numbing itself. The spirit endures by understanding purpose. John's ability to bear hardship after his vision is not diminished. It is strengthened. He can now suffer without becoming bitter, because suffering no longer defines the narrative. As embodiment deepens, language itself becomes restrained. Those who have seen deeply often speak less, not more. Words are chosen carefully because they carry weight. John records what he is instructed to record. No more and no less. This discipline protects truth from distortion. Distortion often occurs when insight outpaces character. Embodiment ensures balance. Spiritual perception without embodiment becomes abstraction. Embodiment grounds insight into lived reality. John's vision does not elevate him above humanity. It roots him more firmly within it. This rooting transforms the relationship with the body. The flesh is no longer treated as an enemy. It is recognized as an instrument. Hunger, fatigue, emotion, and desire are acknowledged without being obeyed blindly. The body becomes a servant of alignment rather than its saboteur. As this integration completes, fear of death loses its grip almost entirely. Death is no longer perceived as annihilation, but as transition. This does not remove sorrow, but it removes terror. John's vision reveals continuity rather than cessation. Life is not fragile in the way the flesh believes it to be. This awareness profoundly alters priorities. Accumulation loses urgency. Comparison loses relevance. Legacy becomes less about remembrance and more about transmission. John's concern is not how he will be remembered, but whether truth will continue to move through those who receive it. Transmission is the final responsibility of embodiment. What is embodied must be shared, not imposed, but offered. John's vision is preserved not as spectacle, but as invitation. Those who have eyes to see will recognize themselves within it. Embodiment also brings acceptance of limitation. John does not attempt to explain everything. Mystery remains. The flesh is disturbed by mystery because it equates knowledge with safety. The spirit is at peace with mystery because it trusts coherence beyond comprehension. This trust produces serenity even amid unresolved questions. Answers are no longer demanded prematurely. Silence becomes acceptable. Waiting becomes active rather than passive. John's final posture reflects this maturity. He stands between revelation and fulfillment without anxiety. As embodiment stabilizes, life regains simplicity, not superficial simplicity, but essential clarity. What matters becomes obvious. What does not matter loses its grip. This clarity does not require withdrawal from society. It enables engagement without entanglement. John's vision ultimately reveals that the highest spiritual state is not ecstasy, power, or transcendence, but faithfulness. Faithfulness to truth, to alignment, to perception beyond appearances. This faithfulness is quiet, steady, and resilient. Resilience is the final fruit, not resistance to pain, but continuity through it. John emerges from his vision not invulnerable, but unbroken. This is the difference. The flesh seeks invulnerability and fails. The spirit cultivates resilience and endures. In this final stage, the boundary between sacred and ordinary dissolves. Everything becomes a site of alignment. Every moment carries potential meaning. The vision does not end when the images fade. It continues in how life is lived. This is the ultimate purpose of seeing beyond the flesh. Not to escape the world, not to dominate it, but to inhabit it truthfully. John's vision is complete not because everything has been revealed, but because the one who saw is now able to walk in alignment, regardless of circumstance. If you have followed this journey from sight to embodiment, It is because this path resonates with something already stirring within you. This vision is not confined to history. It is alive wherever someone chooses truth over illusion and alignment over fear. If you want to continue walking in this depth and exploring the realities beyond the flesh, subscribe to the channel now and remain with us as we continue to uncover the unseen foundations shaping your life.